The 79th session of the annual UN General Assembly is about to kick off. Now, ahead of that General Assembly, the Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has given a press briefing. Now, I want to share with you what this African woman, a journalist from Namibia, has asked Antonio Guterres and what he has to say with regards to Africa in the United Nations. Now, just to give you a quick background, this 79th session of General Assembly, in general, the UN General Assembly has 193 member states. Now, each member states have equal votes. Now, in this 79th session, there are these things that are expected that the UN will take a decision. Now, appointing the Secretary General on the recommendation of the Security Council, electing the non-permanent members of the Security Council, and approving UN budget. Now, there is also an organ of the United Nations Security Council, which have 5 members, which have veto powers. These are China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States. And there are always 2 non-permanent member states. These are for 2020. For 2024, it is Algeria and also and Ecuador. Actually, Algeria for 2025. Now, Africa is the other new thing is that Africa demands to have a not non-permanent, but a permanent seat in the Security Council. But the UN is, the US just a few days ago, ahead of this General Assembly, has said that it supports it, but without veto power. But what is it without veto power? Anyway, that's another discussion for another topic or another time. But for now, let's watch together what this journalist from Namibia has confronted to Antonio Guterres.
Spoke briefly on the reform of the UN Security Council. During the global call last week, Namibia's president, as well as other African leaders, called for that reform. And this has been a debate that has been ongoing in terms of Africa's representation on the UN Security Council. Despite this, I wanted to find out what progress has been made to realize this reform for Africa's representation, and despite waiting for the specter of the future from the global of the future summit. And I also wanted to find out, are you in agreement with this reform and Africa's greater representation? And should this representation happen, how will the UN ensure that Africa is not sidelined and their voices are heard?
First of all, if there is an injustice in the way international organizations are ruled, that injustice is related to Africa. Africa is a double victim of colonialism. First of all, because of the colonialism itself, and second, because the institutions we have today were created, many of them, when African countries were not yet independent, and so they were not present. And because of that, they are clearly underrepresented, and their voice and their influence is clearly reduced. And obviously, in no place, this inequality is more obvious and more, I would say, unacceptable than in the Security Council of the United Nations, where you have, for instance, 3 European permanent members and no African permanent member, which of course doesn't correspond at all to the present situation of the world. I would like to say that when I started as Secretary General, to talk about reform of the Security Council was taboo. This was something that there was even a committee of the Assembly, but the committee couldn't even have written documents to be published. So this was something that was completely untouchable. Situation has changed dramatically. Now everybody recognizes that the reform is needed. And we had recently a meeting of the Security Council, particular in relation to Africa, where all members of the Council, including the P5, recognize the need to have an African representation at the level of permanent members of the Security Council, plus also an increase in the non-permanent members. And recently, the ambassador of the United States announced that the US would support 2 permanent members of Africa. And in the text that is at the present moment being discussed for the Summit of the Future, there is a very clear and strong commitment that, of course, if approved, will veiculate the United Nations in relation to that African presence and in relation to the reform of the Council in itself. So I think that we have witnessed enormous change, and now we need to make sure that the concrete things that need to be done are effectively done, and this means work for the UN, and this means work also for the African Union, the African continent, in the selection of their representatives as soon as a decision of the reform is taken. And I hope that we are witnessing an acceleration in that direction that I would like to see with the results produced in the short term. So,
thank you, Sherwin.
Secretary General Sherwin Bryce, South African Broadcasting. You say the Summit of the Future is an essential step towards making global institutions more legitimate, effective, and fit for a world today and tomorrow. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was the SDG summit in 2016 that was to make institutions more legitimate, effective, and fit for today. Take the summits that we've had in the past. For example, the 2018 summit that was a precursor to the UN General Assembly in 2018. It's called the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit. The declaration that heads of state and government adopted then said that we as heads of state and government commit to redouble our efforts to build a just, peaceful, prosperous, inclusive, and fair world, revive the values for which Nelson Mandela stood by, placing human dignity at the center of our actions. We commit to demonstrating mutual respect, tolerance, understanding, reconciliation in our relations. I would argue that that declaration has not been implemented, similar to all the other declarations and pacts that we've seen heads of state and government adopt that are gathering dust on the ash heap of history. I don't understand the case you're making to say that this is now going to be the beginning of something new.
It's very simple. The SDG summit and the SDGs themselves and all the declarations you mentioned are about the what is needed. The Summit of the Future is about the how. The Summit of the Future takes into account the fact that to be able to implement the Agenda 2030, to be able to implement all the extraordinarily important declarations that you have mentioned, we need to have reformed institutions. Because today's institutions are institutions that correspond to the world of the post-Second World War and are totally unable, they have proven to be, to address the challenges of today, and namely the challenges of developing countries. And the Summit of the Future is about the how, is about the reforms that are necessary in all areas, Security Council, Bretton Woods institutions, aspects related to artificial intelligence, to climate. I mean, in all those areas, there is a serious problem of governance. And it is about that governance that this summit is about. And that is new and essential.
Benno,
because if not, all the rest will fail.
Benno,
as it has been failing until now.
I apologize, sir. Benno Gabriel, then Ibtisam.
Hi, Secretary General here. Benno Schwinghammer with the German press agency. Good luck for high-level week. So you emphasized already that the negotiations for the Pact of the Future are still going on, but diplomats say this paper will not turn into a visionary paper till Sunday. The P5 know that. They will not, or they don't plan to attend on level of head of government or head of state in this summit. What's your message to them? Is that the leadership you wanted to see from the P5?
Well, first of all, one of the P5 will be present, as far as I understand. So only P4.
Not on the level of head of state or government, at least to the provisionary speakers list.
I presume President Biden will be intervening in this high-level week
I'm talking about the summit of the future. Sorry.
But I mean, he'll be speaking in the general debate. So I mean, there will be a presence at the level of heads of state and government. But one of the very important aspects that is in the summit of the future is the recognition that our institutions need to be reformed. And one of the institutions that need that reform is the Security Council. And one of the questions that is important in relation to the future relates exactly to the role of the P5 and to the need to have a certain redistribution of power to make things more fair and more effective.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching. So that's how Antonio Guterres addressed the question from the Namibian journalist and also from the South African journalist regarding Africa. So we will try to post or bring you discussions following this UN General Assembly as it happens in the coming week. Thanks again and bye-bye.